you've given us these bodies that you want us to take good care of them. And sometimes we don't do the best. Help us to see where we could do better, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen. I turned the computer off so I could get this contrast. It has jumped to a figure that it doesn't look nice, and so I'm increase contrast. There, I think that's going to be better. All right. The number one killer of people in the U.S. is heart disease. There are many kinds of heart diseases, hundreds. But when you and I say heart disease, you know what we normally mean? Coronary artery disease. That's what kills people. Mostly. They can die of other heart conditions, of course, but that's the real issue. And I thought you'd be disappointed if I didn't show you a picture of my grandson. Now, today he's 16 years old, but when he was born, our youngest daughter, she loves to play baseball. And back when she was a child, maybe 16 or something, when I'd get home from work, if it wasn't raining or it wasn't dark, she would grab her baseball mitt and her bat and ball and say, Daddy, let's go play ball. And so I'd hit flies and, So here this kid can't even walk, but she wants him to learn to pitch. This is the wind-up and this is the pitch. All right. What we're really looking at is a problem that poor people do not have. I have a number of physician friends who've worked in Africa. One of them, he and I have lectured together all over this country and across the world. And he was a missionary for 11 years in Africa. He never saw one case of coronary artery disease. Not one. And it's because of the way they live. They come to America and start living like Americans, and they get heart disease. There's a whole class of diseases that are caused by our affluent life. Cancer, if you consider cancer of any place in the body, it is closely approaching the number of deaths in America as there are from heart disease. Today, 1 person out of 12 has diabetes in this country. By 2050, it's going to be 1 out of 4, according to the International Diabetes Association. High blood pressure is rampant. You want to guess what percent of Americans are overweight? It was raised recently to 70.4%. 70%. And overweight is the cause of many health problems, arthritis, all of these. You can completely prevent kidney stones by a proper lifestyle. Kidney failure, usually the result of diabetes. Claudication is a fancy word for blood clots in the arteries or the veins of the leg, usually the veins. John Mcdougall, how many know the name? Can I see your hands? Good, just about all of you. Recently in a lecture said, 100% of heart disease is what? Amazing, which I've sort of been saying, haven't I? And 100% of it is reversible. I don't know how many of you have heard about that. We're going to look at it this evening. This is how many 747s full die every day from coronary artery disease in the U.S. If a 747 went down somewhere in this country and everybody died, like the plane yesterday in China, would that be a big deal on the news? It certainly would be. And if the next day another one went down in another city and everybody died, would that really be something? Do you know that after 2 of those they would ground all the 747s? And here we are with 6 a day, and we walk around like it's just normal. Well, it is normal, unfortunately. Incredible. Now, like I said, there's many kinds. Everybody knows. I put that in quotes. Are you aware of the fact? I think every American that walks on the street should know this or does know it. Saturated fat is bad for your heart. Are you all aware of that? Everybody nodding? Saturated fat is considered a big problem, and it's correct, it is. So Americans believe then that if saturated fat is bad for you, they've been told because of the studies supposedly in the Mediterranean that unsaturated fat would be good for your heart. What's the unsaturated fat that you've heard is good for your heart? Olive oil. Every American knows that. Unfortunately, what? It's not true. I'll tell you the answer right off, although it won't make a lot of sense to you. It's just a little less worse than saturated fat, but it's still bad for you. And I'll show you why. Do you remember back, it's been 25 years ago probably, maybe not quite that long. You heard that walnuts were good for your heart. You remember that? Everybody? You remember that? Okay, if you didn't remember it, I'm telling you that that happened. And I actually have the man that did the research, the first research, many others have done it since, is a friend of mine. And I attended the lecture where he first presented his results on feeding people walnuts. And there's about 300 people there. And at the end of the lecture, they usually give time for Q&A. And I had the nerve, out of 300 people, to jump to my feet and raise my hand, the first of anybody, and I asked him a question. I'll tell you what it was in a minute, and I'll tell you what his answer was. Since Dr. Sabate did those studies on walnuts, scientists have studied all the nuts, and they all do about the same thing. Let me kind of give you a sense of what's going on here. The idea is that red stands for nuts less than once a week. Green stands for nuts 1 to 4 times a week. And the orangish. It doesn't look that orange in here, does it? But the green one is nuts almost every day. The idea is this is the relative risk for coronary artery disease events. Not just that you got some clotting in there, but that something happened like a stroke or death. Those are the two main things that we get from coronary artery disease. And we're going to call 100% just what's happening in America all the time. And the idea is, I think you can see my big pointer, I made it big today, that when people get, on my screen it looks a lot better, it's yellowish. When people get nuts 1 to 4 times a week, what is the approximate decrease in coronary events? Talk to me. It's not 20. 80% would make it 20. What is it about? Give me a better approximation. Yeah, 17% or something. Is that significant? Sure it is. What if they get nuts about every day? What's the decrease then? It's over 50, isn't it? 52 or 3 or 4 or something like that. Just because, listen to this, they had a handful of nuts a day. Isn't that amazing? And it works for men or women. That's why we have these different things here. It works if that means less than 50 or over 50. It works for people who are vegetarians, even non-vegetarians, although not quite as good. Are y'all with me on that? It works for people who don't get much exercise, although again, not quite as good. Are y'all with me on that? You tracking with me, everybody? And if they get more exercise, they get quite a strong situation with nuts every day. It even works for people who are overweight. If that's BMI, your body mass index above 24. It's not quite as good as normal weight. Can you see that? So here's what I asked Dr. Sabate when I jumped to my feet. I said, now I'm talking about the studies he did with walnuts. I said, Are these replacement studies? You may not even know what I'm talking about. I'm going to tell you what I'm talking about. He said, oh, yes. So here's what he meant by that. However much fat was in the nuts, they got a handful a day. Bigger people, bigger hand. It was kind of a dose-related experiment. However much fat was in that handful of nuts, they took out of their diet. You following me? Now, the average American is getting a fair amount of saturated fat. A lot of it, actually. In those nuts, there's very little saturated fat. So they were getting the same amount of fat. Are y'all with me on that? The difference was some saturated fat was being replaced by some unsaturated fat. And was there a big drop in heart disease? Amazing. Amazing. The nut studies were based on replacement. You're with me, aren't you? And this man doesn't understand that. He says, doctor, should I eat the diet before or after meals? You laugh at that, but friends, that's what Americans do. They have their regular meal, and they have heard that nuts are good for you, or olive oil, and so they pour it on or add the nuts. They are worse off than they were before. Because any fat above a certain level is bad for us. I'll show you how that works. And let me show you the mechanism. I'm trying to go as fast as I can because there's a lot of slides tonight. This is a drawing of the gallbladder, the common bile duct. I don't know if you know this. The gallbladder makes bile. And bile is needed. This isn't terribly important, but I like people to know what's really the case. The bile does not digest fat. It makes the digestion of fat easier through emulsification. I'd love to take time on that, but I'm just going to carry on. Now, here is the common bile duct coming out of the liver, where the bile is made, and it is stored in the gallbladder. Are y'all with me on that? Because there's a valve down here where the common bile duct comes into the small intestine, just about 1.5 inches below the bottom of the stomach. This is the stomach, as you can see. This is the pancreas back there, and that's the liver. So there's a valve here that opens and allows bile to flow when there's a meal to digest. And when the valve is closed, then the bile is stored in the gallbladder. And the most common surgery in America is a cholecystectomy, a fancy word for a gallbladder removal. And all of it happens because people are not living like they could and would completely avoid the necessity for that. Somebody always says, well, so my gallbladder's removed, what happens? Well, what happens is the bile dribbles into the small intestine without the large push that it would want after a meal. So some people have a little problem with digesting fat because of that. It's interesting that most people do fairly well. Now, the cholesterol connection, everybody knows about that. The liver makes bile, which is needed to help digest fat. The liver increases bile with increased saturated fat intake. That's a very important point. Your body makes more bile if the fat is what? Saturated. Does the body make bile no matter what the fat is? Say yes. But it makes more bile if the fat is saturated. Now, here's something you may not know. Bile is essentially pure cholesterol. Our bodies make a lot of cholesterol. There's many things that many places and situations where cholesterol is needed, and our body makes it. And one of them is bile. For most Americans, listen to this carefully, the bile is reabsorbed into the bloodstream from the small intestine. I'm sorry, It's from the lower end of the colon, actually. But this fat that I eat makes my body make cholesterol, and that bile, which is virtually, if it was dry, it's virtually pure cholesterol. And that gets reabsorbed in most Americans back into their blood. So how's that do? When I eat more fat, my body makes more. And if I eat saturated fat, it makes even more cholesterol. And this is the issue with causing coronary artery disease. Raising the amount of cholesterol found in the blood, an increase is the result. The lifetime risk, now this word ischemic, you probably know, it's a word we don't use very often. It just means a blockage or a decreased circulation. The lifetime risk of heart disease was reduced by 31% in those who consume nuts, and 37% in male vegetarians. This is a different study. What I showed you on the screen a bit ago was the average of all the nut studies that were done, just to kind of see the whole picture. Notice that the higher consumption of all fruit or dried fruit was associated with lower risks of cancers. We'll have a topic on cancer another evening. So, believe it or not, 50 years ago, we did not have the data, but the Surgeon General could just see it. And he said that he thought coronary artery disease was almost completely preventable. Clear back when we did not have the data. Today you can cross this out. Is that what John Mcdougall said? Yes. He said it is 100% preventable. Now there actually is a genetic situation, which I won't have time to deal with this week, that makes that an exception. But that doesn't happen to more than maybe 5 or 10 people in the whole United States. So it's essentially a non-issue. But there is a genetic situation that if you came to one of our Livian programs, I would go into those details, which makes this statement slightly, slightly incorrect. So replacing animal fat with plant fat, because animal fat is mostly saturated, and plant fat, with only 2 exceptions, is mostly unsaturated fat. You know what the exceptions are? Now listen, this is an important thing to kind of know. Every plant has fat in it. Even lettuce? Yes. Oranges? Listen, it's without exception. All plants have fat. With 2 exceptions, the fat in almost all plants is low. And I should have said, there are 4 categories of plants, let me correct myself, that are high in fat. You know them. Avocados, olives, nuts, and seeds. Those are the plants that are high in fat. And all of them have some saturated fat. There's no exception, but it's a small amount. Except in, want to guess? Coconut. And let's see, what's the other one? It escapes me for a second. No. Every plant has saturated fat. Are you all with me on that? But not much. It's coconut oil and palm kernel oil or palm kernel seeds. So if you replace some animal fat with plant fat, same amount of fat, that was what the study showed, correct? You reduce the heart disease by large amounts. Are you all with me on this? Just replacing it. And you can do better if you even reduce the amount of fat, which I'll show you in a minute. So that's a summary. I'm going to pass that up because we've really talked about those things. And heart disease is not caused by a germ. It's caused by how we live. The very first study that was ever done to see if changing people's diet would change the amount of heart disease and death was done in Finland. Finland and the U.S. are always neck and neck to see how many people they can kill with heart disease. We are neck and neck. So they did this at 2 mental hospitals because people lived there long term. That's just the first letter of the hospital names. And these were the death rates at the 2 hospitals. This many people died each year out of 1,000 patients. From what? Coronary. And I'm not going to say the long term. When I say heart disease, I mean CAD, right? Coronary artery disease. Pretty close to the same amount of death. And they made a dietary change And what they did was two very simple things. They took cow's milk, took the fat out, and replaced it with soy oil. Same amount of fat. Got it? We have a term for that in the scientific community. It's called filled milk. And they replaced butter with margarine. Now, I'm struggling for time, and I don't know if I should do this. Everybody in here knows that margarine's bad for you, right? That's kind of a crazy idea. Do you know why why people have come to hear that, or why people say that? Anybody know why that is? Yeah, processed would be kind of correct, but I'm thinking of something specific. It's because they have found trans fats in margarine. You know that word, don't you, now? We didn't know that word 10 years ago, hardly, did we? I don't know if you know that de Blasio, was it de Blasio or the one before him, had them vote an ordinance that in New York City you could not buy anything with trans fat. Recently, it may have been de Blasio that did this one, it's illegal for anybody to use it in restaurants. Even if you bought your food from some other state, it's illegal in New York City to use trans fats. And if I had time to do a whole lecture on fat, I'd show you what they are and where they come from. I'll tell you at least where they come from is when you partially hydrogenate. I'll put the Y in there. I'll abbreviate that. When you partially hydrogenate fat. Do you remember how many years ago there was this thing that was raised up? Be careful of partially saturated fat. Remember that? A few heads are nodding, and some heads are not doing either. That was made a big deal, and so people were watching for that on labels. And the reason was, when you hydrogenate fat, by the way, fat is often liquid. In fact, if it's unsaturated fat, it's liquid at room temperature. If it's saturated fat, it's solid at room temperature. Give me some examples. Butter? Well, coconut oil is awfully close there in terms of room temperature. Lard, bacon, all of those things that come from animals that make them puffy, and and you and me, if we didn't have any fat on us, we'd look pretty strange. But when you take plant fat, liquid, and hydrogenate it, you add hydrogen to it, so it's now saturated with hydrogen. That's what saturated means. It is saturated with hydrogen. The fatty acids have hydrogens everywhere. In unsaturated fat, there's places where the hydrogens are missing in the legs. And when you when you partially saturate plant oils, they become solid, and people liked that. You could have shortening and make your crusts short. Remember that? Pardon? Flaky. Nice. Bad, but nice. But in the process of partially hydrogenating, some fats become what we call trans fats. I'd love to take more time, but I don't have it tonight. And they are a little more toxic than regular fats. They're all toxic when we eat, especially too much of it. But that's the deal. And so, and the reason that they originally made margarine was because it would have less saturated fat. I don't know if you know this, but margarine is made from partially hydrogenated fatty acids, or fat. And if you don't saturate it and you only partially hydrogenate it, you get less heart disease. In fact, this was the first study that showed that. They're giving these people milk with olive oil. That's not been partially hydrogenated, so there's no trans fats there. The only place trans fats come from, with a tiny, tiny, tiny exception, is partially hydrogenating plant fats. That's the only place it comes from. But anyway, margarine was considered to be better because there was less saturated fat in it. Are y'all with me on that? And here are the results. Those people that got the ordinary American diet, but I'm sorry, they were put on this dietary change, their cholesterol decreased by 19%, which caused the death rate from heart disease to decrease by how much? Is that a big deal? Sure it is. And that data drove the nutrition information that replacing, remember the dietary intervention? We replaced animal fat with what? Plant fat. That's where that all came from, was this study and others similar to it. So here is the report. You guys are aware of the fact that they write scientific papers. And they usually have a summary paragraph that you can forget reading the whole paper and just read the paragraph. This is what it says. We feel that the findings of our study justify the conclusion that in men, whoops, this didn't work for women. I don't suppose any of you ever knew a thing about that. But this whole thing about reducing heart disease by, giving people plant fats would lower the heart disease. It didn't work for women. The conclusion that in men, a cholesterol-lowering diet considerably reduced mortality from coronary, heart, or artery disease. It goes on to say, the data also indicate that total mortality was favorably affected by this diet. Now, I'll have a slide on this, but I'm just going to tell you, people die from a lot of things. So when you do a study to see if they're dying more or less from something you're feeding them, you got to be careful to look at total mortality as well as death from whatever you're studying, like heart disease or cancer or something. You all with me on the idea? And here's what happened. I left part of it out until now. What does it mean if it says though not conclusively? I'm going to pick on my friends. And Judy, if Tom said, I love you, though not conclusively, he would be in big trouble. You know what that means? The overall death rate, listen carefully, the overall death rate changed such a small amount that you could not conclude that this experiment decreased the overall death rate. Were Americans ever told that? Say no. All they were told was, if the olive oil is good for you. And it turns out, would you like to know what changed the overall death rate? Let me pass this slide up because I'm in a hurry here. Replacement studies conducted in Finland and later in Los Angeles showed like a 50% decrease in death from heart disease, but cancer made the overall death rate as high as before. Even today, do Americans know that? No. People come to me frequently because I speak so often in Adventist churches like this, and they say, how come Adventists are dying of all this pancreatic disease, pancreatic cancer? It's because of the oils we use, friends. The oil, when you make oil from a plant, it is toxic. I'll show you more about that, especially when we study cancer. And that's not good news because all of us have been taught that the plant oils are good for us. Am I right? It's just not correct. I'm sorry. Thank you, Kathy. Oh, sure. Anytime.
When you say margarine, we know what margarine used to be. But what is margarine now? Is that like earth balance?
Oh, this is a good point. Americans are so uninformed. It makes me want to scream sometimes. Here's this stuff that says earth balance. And what they're really talking about is they have replaced some saturated fat with unsaturated fat. And that unsaturated fat came from a plant, and it's toxic. And America, isn't it fair to say that none of you understood this before I'm describing this tonight? Is that correct? It's crazy how, and I've known about this for 40 years, I think. More than that. Yes, please.
I'm going to ask a question now, and
Sure.
privately, so it's not just looking down, but when you were talking about nuts, and they're very, very healthy.
Yeah.
Does that apply to nuts that have been heated?
Nuts that what?
Have been roasted?
I'm not sure what your question is.
When you cook a nut,
Yeah.
okay, does the oil get damaged?
Good question. And the answer is that when you leave the oil in the plant protects it from being oxidized. Now, you know about this. Walnuts are probably the most famous ones, for if you let them sit long enough on the shelf, they become rancid. But the plant is desperately trying to protect the oil from getting next to oxygen or getting oxidized. When you oxidize oil, it becomes a carcinogen. Did you hear that? What does that mean? It causes cancer. I'm going to show you the mechanism tomorrow night, I think it is. We're going to deal with cancer. No, that's the third night. Tomorrow night we're going to deal with the diabetes question, which is so closely connected to dementia. I hope you don't stay away just because you're not going to get diabetes. Because what happens to most Americans, even though they don't get diabetes, is caused by the same thing that causes diabetes, which is caused by their lifestyle. I'm getting to it, I think. I'm getting to it. I was trying to describe for you that plants are designed to protect the oil from being oxidized. And even cooking the plant generally is not a problem. Even then, it's still pretty protected, although if you think about it, the more surface you open to it, especially with a high-fat plant, you're probably getting some oil near the surface. But the real problem, folks, is taking the oil out of the plant. The minute the oil leaves the plant in the factory, it starts oxidizing. And it's the oxidized oil that is toxic. And in fact, you all know this thing we call rancid. You know the odor and you know the taste. Long before you can taste it, it's happening. Now, it's true, if you keep the oil in the refrigerator, it slows it down. All chemical reactions are slowed by cooling. In fact, every 10 degrees centigrade, sorry about that, every 10 degrees you lower the temperature, any chemical reaction, without exception, it cuts its speed in half, however fast it's happening. 10-degree increase in temperature. The rate is the way we like to say it. I say speed for lay people. The rate of the reaction is decreased by 50% for every 10 degrees you lower it. So you get it close to freezing, and that would be better. But the best thing is to do what God gave Adam and Eve. Did they have a factory in the Garden of Eden where they extracted oil from plants? I'm sorry.
What would you recommend in place of oil then for cooking?
Neva's the expert at that, and our cookbook is full of examples for that. Good question. But she makes all the things that people normally buy or make from oils. She makes them often from nuts, blending the nut up in water. Blending the nut up in water will never release the oil. If you put nuts in a food processor, or even in a blender for that matter, if you let that blade whack the nuts long enough, the nuts will turn to nut butter. What made them turn to nut butter? Released oil. Nobody loves peanut butter more than I, but it's not a good idea because you've released some oil, which oxidizes, and those oxidative products are carcinogens. It doesn't matter what you do when you release oil, that happens. And again, Neva, bless her heart, by God's grace, has spent her life developing recipes. We didn't even bring any cookbooks. I think we have a couple in the car. Some of you already have one. I'm putting some graphs on the board that show you what they did. The height of the bar represents how much fat people are getting. what percent of their calories is coming from fat? What do you suppose the U means? Huh? Yes. And what do you suppose the S means? Yeah. So this shows you that people are getting, this is an average American. They're getting about 15, 18% of their fat is unsaturated, but a lot of it is saturated, and this is what is killing Americans. And this is what the study did. Why are the tops the same height? Same amount of fat. Is that what the studies did? They were replacement studies. Are y'all with me? All of them were. But the decrease in the saturated fat is was what reduced the heart disease. Now, this is what Americans thought they were supposed to do. Doctor, should I eat the diet before or after meals? Are y'all with me on this? Are we uninformed as Americans or not? It's amazing. This is what the American Heart Association tells you should do. If you go to your physician and he finds or she finds that you have coronary artery disease, they put you on or they tell you to follow the American Heart Association diet. And that's decreasing the total fat from 40 to 30. What's that tiny piece of red down there mean? Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Almost no saturated fat because it's bad for your heart. And here is now a artist's conception of an artery with some plaque. I think you're okay with me calling it plaque. You've heard that term. Here's the muscle. There's two layers, an outside layer, an inside layer of muscle, and then a lining. It has various names because in the clip I'm going to play for you, the doctor will use the term. This is called endothelial tissue. And the artist has tried to picture it with a little white layer. And this is the plaque. You may not know this. I want you to know it. This is an important thing. The plaque in our arteries does not form in the arteries. It forms under the lining. Can you see that? It turns out that is really bad news. The artist is trying to show you, it doesn't do a very good job, that the lining has gotten sick. Are y'all with me in what I'm trying to describe? It's been 25 years ago, probably more. Well, about that. About 26, 27 years ago. Some scientists and some physicians were working together, and they were doing angiograms. You know what I mean? That's where they photograph, if you will, with x-rays, actually, the arteries on the heart. They were doing angiograms while people were having heart attacks. And it's like they slapped their forehead and said, why didn't we think of this before? And what they learned was that 99% of heart attacks occur not because the plaque fills the artery, but because when the intima or the endothelial tissue, either of those terms is used, that white lining, it's made of a layer of cells. When the intima, more than one layer, but it's a cellular layer. When the intima becomes unhealthy, which most Americans are facilitating. Y'all with me? It allows the mushy plaque. When plaque is first made, it is soft and mushy. I'll show you why in a minute. It allows that plaque to break through and ooze into the bloodstream, and a clot forms almost instantly and fills the artery. Y'all with me on this? Only 1% of people die from heart disease because the artery got filled with plaque. Got it? Now the body seems to understand this, and it desperately works to harden this soft stuff. Why? So it can't cause a heart attack. This is what we call hardening of the arteries. It's an improper term. It's hardening the plaque that's been deposited. That's the body's desperate effort. But if I keep living the same way, I'm always making some more soft plaque. And so we have this huge death rate from heart attacks, 99% of which are caused by the oozing of the soft plaque through an unhealthy endothelial or intima lining the artery. Amazing story. The word we use to describe the soft stuff, even if it's hardened, is athero, which means mush. It's a Greek word that means mush, and sclerosis is a word that means hardened. So that's where we get that term that you're all familiar with. The first man that ever did a study to see if you could reverse the plaque, which everybody knew you could not. It's amazing, folks, the opinions that we get. And that you can't get money to test it because everybody knows it's not going to happen. It's just maddening what goes on. You all know this. We especially have learned this during these 2 years with COVID issues. But I have so much respect for this fellow. His name is Dean Ornish. He's a professor, physician at the University of California in San Francisco. He raised privately $3 million. He got 24 men who had angiographically illustrated heart disease. You understand what I'm saying? He could measure how, and he did this. He would take each centimeter of artery and write down how much it was closed with soft plaque, or hard in this case. Didn't matter. He wanted to know how much was closed. He randomly took half of those men in two groups, and one half were the experimentals, and the other half were the controls. You kind of know about that, I'm sure. And this was the average blockage. Some arteries more, some men more, some less, but the average over the 12 men that were going to be experimented on was about a 40% blockage. Are you all with me on that? And he put them on a whole plant regimen without any plant oils. And in 12 months, their plaque reduced by 5.5%. You don't seem very impressed. What did the medical community say before this study was done? You could not do it. The controls who were put, listen, on the American Heart Association diet, they started out about the same, maybe a couple of percent higher. It's not significant. Their plaque increased almost 9%. This is insanity, friends. If the average person goes to see their cardiologist and he says, look, you've got plaque, I'm going to put you on a diet. And what do they think about that diet? That's going to take care of the problem. What does the study show? It's going to be increasing still. It's amazing what goes on in this wonderful country, and I mean that without sarcasm. These are actual photographs I got from Dr. Castelli. I'd love to tell you the story behind that, but I'm not going to do it for time. This is an artery taken from a person that died. We call it a cross-section. It's like the pipe is coming toward you, and we cut it off and look at it. Y'all with me on this? Greatly magnified. This is the inside edge of the artery. This is hard plaque. This is the soft plaque. And this is the only part where blood is flowing. Got it? And I'm just going to tell you that looking at this, it looks to me like maybe 15%. So there's an 85% blockage here. Now the fact that and we call this soft plaque right here. The fact that it's encased with hard plaque, this blockage is not dangerous for heart attack because the soft plaque is not near the intima, which you can't even see in this picture. The intima would be still lining the part of the artery that is still open. Are you all with me? Another picture, I have several that he gave me, you'll see the intima. It takes kind of a special angle and to see it. It's so thin. Although I can imagine I'm seeing a little bit of white line there. You mean that's the intima. Now this again, that's the edge of the artery. And this is the open part. We have a fancy name for it. And this is the Atheromatous Core. And can you see the intima in this one? Y'all with me on that? Atheroma. What does athero mean? Soft or mushy. So we call this the atheromatous core, and the body is desperately, and it has changed all of the soft plaque earlier to hard plaque. Are y'all with me on this? I bored some of you to sleep, I'm sure, sorry. But the fact that this thing is so close to the intima is kind of a scary. This is kind of a scary thing. However, if the lining of the artery was healthy, even this is not dangerous. And you can make the lining of your artery healthy in several days of wise living. If you go back to unwise living, what do you suppose happens? It gets dangerous again. So this is a very encouraging thing if somebody is having a problem like this. This man died. Let me show you something interesting. Again, this is the outside of the artery. This is all hard plaque. This is soft. The soft plaque is kind of like that, but some of it broke through right here. And that clot formed so quickly that it actually caught the ooze right in the clot. Amazing? Aren't you glad you know all this? All this gory stuff. Oh, that's right. I put some arrows on this one too. So I shouldn't have used my mouse. There's where it broke through, and it's kind of distributed differently than the other one we saw. Okay, there's the clot. So, along comes Caldwell Esselstyn. How many know the name? See, you've seen Forks Over Knives. How many of you have seen the film Eating You Alive? One of the best there is. We show it now to every group that comes to our place for a week. It is just outstanding. There must be 25 physicians in that film that are all teaching what I'm telling you tonight. Not in this kind of detail. They just say, stop using oils. Use only plants and stop using oils. But that's what Esselstyn did. And instead of the fat getting taken down to 30% of your diet, what did he get the total fat intake to? What percentage of your total calories? And what about the saturated fat? Just about non-existent. And he was able to make plaque go away even more dramatically than Ornish did. Dean Ornish was the one I showed you earlier. He has a picture in his book, How to Reverse Heart Disease, where a physician friend of his had all of the plaque removed in his artery, I'm talking soft plaque now, in 1 year. Very, very interesting. Hard plaque, as far as we know, does not go away. I want to say it doesn't matter. Is hard plaque dangerous as far as a heart attack is concerned? No. No. Now, it reduces the flow, and you might have some ischemic issues with when you're out running or something. By the way, it's been a long time now. People are really into exercise, which is a good idea. A fellow named Jim Fixx was the editor of Runner's World. Died of a heart attack. Exercise is important, but this number one killer, folks, is not cured by exercise. Are y'all with me? It's cured by a whole plant regimen. Now, if 30% makes you worser and 10% makes you better, it must be that somewhere in between you don't get worser or better, right? Y'all with me on the idea? So, it turns out when you use a whole plant regimen without the plant oils taken out, you get about 20% of your calories. I taught college nutrition for 10 years. And I had my students keep track of everything they ate for a full month. Now, the interesting thing is, if they chose to, they could eat at Neva's table. In a small college. And with computers, it's pretty easy. You keep track of everything you eat for a month. And their fat intake, those who ate at Neva's table, fell Well, it was, on average, it was 17%. So that's really what we see here, isn't it? A whole plant regimen. And when we say whole plant, this is hard, folks. You can't do this maybe overnight. But when we say whole plant, does that eliminate plant oils? Yes, because oil is a refined product. Are you all with me? Now, I don't use the V words because you can be a junk food vegan. I mean, after all, potato chips and French fries are vegan, aren't they? Say yes. Yes. Y'all with me? You can use the V word if you want. I'm just trying to point out that in the industry today, among the physicians that are teaching this, they use the term whole plant, which means no refined products in terms of the heart disease. And actually, all of the chronic conditions, folks, it's hard to believe. Diabetes, arthritis, fibromyalgia, the list just goes on and on. These things go away, pretty much all of it. Sometimes there's arthritis left, but it greatly increased for most people, a decrease of the symptoms on a whole plant regimen. It's astonishing. I'm sorry, dear? Oh, thank you, dear. When I say whole plant, am I saying you're not supposed to eat nuts? No. Am I saying you're not supposed to eat avocados or olives? No. Sure. Thank you, dear, for just making that clear. And what? Oh, yeah. If it's a plant, eat it without refining it. This is a study by Esselstyn just recently. Well, it's been a couple of years now. He gave this to me in person. There were 200 people, and none of them that followed the program had 200 people that were on the verge of having problems because of the way their hearts were. And he put them on his program, and only one person, and really that shouldn't even have been on there, had a problem. And when I say problem, I mean a stroke or death. Out of 200 people who were diagnosed with serious coronary artery disease. This is a photograph, a microphotograph on a microscope slide of a white blood cell that we call a macrophage. Macrophage is okay too. Macro means big, and phage means eater. And this is actually a picture on the front of a textbook I have on immunology. This is the front cover of the book. And the idea is that this white blood cell travels in your body, these white blood cells travel in your body looking for things that shouldn't be there and eat them up. They actually ooze around it, and the ooze closes behind it, and now the thing is inside. Can you picture what I described quickly there? And they actually put a germ on this microscope slide, and the white blood cell detected that it's a germ, and it's going to go wrap around it, and there's a fancy name for this process called endocytosis, but don't worry about that. The white blood cell eats it, if you will. By the way, this is not his right foot or his left eye. I don't know how that happened. This guy travels by oozing. Do you know what I mean? Like silly putty, when you leave it overnight. It oozes, kind of. That's how he can travel anywhere in the body. He can travel right through bone. He can travel right through the wall of a vessel. They go everywhere in your body looking for stuff that shouldn't be there. It's really remarkable. I might make it. I've got 4 minutes. This is actually the last slide. The etiology, that is to say, how it happens. So we have here the 2 layers of muscle, 1 layer, 2 layer. Are y'all with me? What is this white layer called? The intima, or it's endothelial tissue. And I'm going to expand this till the little box I just put on the screen fills the screen. So in a moment, you're going to see the left-hand top part of the screen. It's going to be inside the artery. And you'll see some intima and some muscle cells. It'll be so much magnification, we will draw the cells. There it is. So this is inside the artery. Are y'all with me? This layer, in fact, I think I have a description of it. That's the intima. It's a slightly different kind of cell than the muscle cells below. That's the intima. Here's the muscle cells. And that's the intima, just to emphasize it. And what happens is, in the etiology of coronary artery disease, something injures endothelial tissue. In cigarette smoke, do you know this? There's over 10,000 poisons, and many of them can injure endothelial tissue. You must know that smokers get heart attacks way more often than the rest of the public. I'm going to picture it as a dent. It is not a dent. It's a chemical assault. So the chemical gets in the cell and causes it to die, actually. Y'all with me in what I'm trying to draw here with a dent? And along comes a macrophage and cleans up the dead cell. You remember the macrophage? Travels the body looking for things to eat up and get them out of the way. Then these two cells communicate with each other chemically, and a decision is made as to which one will make a new cell. That in itself is a marvelous story. Sure. I said there were thousands of chemicals, and many of them could damage endothelial tissue. Don't say smoke does. All the same. And I just use that as one example. The thing that does this most often are stuff that we eat all the time. I just use cigarette smoke as an example because most of you know that it's full of poisons, right? And so it's just one example. Now, this is a whole topic in itself, which I have a whole lecture on for people that are at our place. But those little yellowish, whitish circles or particles I'm using to represent fatty particles in the blood. The technical term is lipids, such as cholesterol and many other blood lipids. And it turns out that the white blood cell knows about these, and the white blood cell, the macrophage, actually has receptors on himself looking for those things, and when he encounters one, he grabs it and pulls it inside. Why? Somebody tell me why. Trying to help protect the body from heart disease. Yeah. Well, actually, yeah, when he gets it inside, he tears it apart chemically. So what happens is when the macrophage is there cleaning up this dead cell, because there's too much of this in the blood. You understand, folks, this is blood right here, right? When there's too many of these in the blood, he gets too many in himself, and he can no longer move. So he's stuck there. We actually have a name for this. I don't know if you ever heard a doctor use the term. It's called a foam cell, because it's full of fatty stuff and it's kind of foamy. And then he dies. And what do you suppose happens when he dies? Another macrophage comes along to clean it up. So listen carefully. It is the accumulation of the macrophages that is the plaque. Some of you are impressed. I wish more of you were impressed. I think that's a really interesting big deal. Would it make sense to you if you got the lipids in the bloodstream low enough that the macrophages could clean up this mess? That's exactly what happens with soft plaque. We've not had any evidence that the hard plaque goes away, and other than causing restricted circulation and maybe inhibits your activity ability a little or a lot, depending. The hard plaque is not dangerous. Are you all with me? It's the soft plaque that's the issue, that when we're making plaque, we have soft plaque all the time. That's the scary part. So, this is a drawing that you could take an hour on. I'll take 1 minute because I'm only 3 minutes over. This is the macrophage. Y'all with me? And these are the receptors all over his body that are designed to pull in these. This is a fancy name for cholesterol. I think you kind of know that, LDL and VLDL and so forth. Notice that when the fat is oxidized, what happens? You don't get it yet, huh? The receptors take the fatty particles in quickly into the macrophage. What would be the issue there? What's the macrophage going to become when it gets a lot of lipids inside of it? Plaque. So all of these fasts you see on here are bad news, and it's a lot because stuff gets oxidized. Are y'all with me on that? And when you take fat out of a plant, folks, it immediately starts oxidizing. It can oxidize even in the plant. Witness a walnut that becomes rancid. Are y'all with me on this? See? But the plant does a pretty good job of protecting the fat in it from being oxidized. The worst one there is what we now call LP little a. You know, you have LDL and VLDL and so forth, but there's a new one. This is new. This is 20 years old at least. How many have ever heard of LP little a, just for fun? One astute person in poor Neva. Can you imagine being this poor girl in our house? She has to listen to this stuff all the time. It's awful. Anyway, we're not doing this yet. We should be. In Germany, the labs are doing this. They're measuring all these different substances in people's blood. What's the LPA level, and so forth in your blood? Because it's an indication that there's issues with rapid atherosclerosis. So that's the story. Now I'm going to play you, and this is not real easy to listen to. Neva kind of got after me. She said, "I'm not sure you should play that," but without an explanation. Thank you, dear. This is Dr. Esselstyn. I may stop and start it, but Randy needs to turn this microphone off so this one won't squeak. Speak up and you can hear me anyway. I think I can start playing it. Right. I'm going to start it over because... Oh, I know what I need to do. I'm sorry. I need to stop it and go back and raise the volume up. Let's try that again.
Oil injures endothelial cells.
What did he say? This guy is probably the top of this game in terms of understanding what's going on. He's the one that did the 200 people, remember? And so forth.
Oil, corn oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, sunflower, coconut oil, palm oil in a cracker, oil in bread, oil in a salad dressing.
So I have a number of people, even on a plant-based diet, that will come in and say, Dr. Stoll, I'm eating really well, but I'm still gaining weight. And my first question to them is, well, how much olive oil,
Sorry.
Oil
dear.
injures endothelial cells. Olive oil, corn oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, sunflower, coconut oil, palm oil.
I don't understand
Oil
why.
in a cracker, oil in bread, oil in a salad dressing.
So I have a number of people, even on a plant-based diet, that will come in and say, Dr. Stoll, I'm eating really well, but I'm still gaining weight. And my first question to them is, well, how much olive oil, coconut oil, etc. are you using in your diet? When they start to add it up, sometimes they're adding 5-6 tablespoons a day. So here we are, 600-700 calories they're adding to their diets, and they don't realize it because they're adding in oils that they assume are healthy.
There aren't some special oils you can buy that are health promoting. They're all processed foods with almost no levels of micronutrients and phytochemicals in them, with no fiber.
Coconut oil is 90% saturated fat. Lard is 43% saturated fat.
The coconut oil miracle is that it's still on the market.
I've got to tell you a funny story. It's got another 15 seconds and we'll be done. We were invited to go to Australia and do a lecture series across the whole country. And the people that invited us, when we got there, we met together and had a meal together. And I found out very quickly, and I thought, what am I doing here? All these lectures that they bring various people over there and what word am I trying to? They take them all over the country to these lecture sites. And they pay for that whole thing and your airfare by selling stuff, books. And one of the things they were promoting, you've probably heard this, is the use of coconut oil. By the way, what did that one physician say? Did he say that yet? No, okay. And so it's the next guy that talks, I think. In fact, it's this one. Did he say it already? The only miracle about coconut oil that it's still on the shelf. And by the way, these clips come from the film I mentioned, Eating You Alive. Absolutely outstanding. Like I said, there's 25 physicians on that film. They're all saying the same thing. They all have become aware of what we're talking about. And what Neva wanted to make sure you understood, most of you cannot do this overnight, but this should be our goal for not just heart disease, but for everything that goes wrong with people. Most of us in America are dying from chronic diseases. What does that mean? It's not an instant death because of something. It's something that's going on for years and finally kills me or makes my life miserable, like perhaps arthritis. So here we were, I'm thinking, what am I going to do? And they've got bottles and gallons of a whole trailer full of coconut oil that they're going to be selling at these lectures I'm doing. We had quite a time. I'll finish, Randy, now with this.
So when we just hear little clips on the news, maybe on the internet, says olive oil's the way to go, we grab onto that. And unfortunately, it's bad information.
There are 3 reasons to eat out. 1, you don't have to do the dishes. 2, the ambiance. 3, companionship. You never go out to eat to further destroy endothelial cells, okay? Everybody says, well, gosh, Dr. Esselstyn, it's so hard. Aren't they going to have some of these places have oil? Yeah, all of them. When the waiter or the waitress comes to your table, you turn in your seat, take your glasses off, look them squarely in the eye. You must understand that I am deathly allergic to a single drop of any oil.
Now, folks, I realize that for all of us, most of us in this room, this is a pretty strong hill to climb. Am I correct? So we want you not to be discouraged, but we want you to know what's going on in your bodies. Amen? And see, if you use Neva's recipes, all 3 of our books, starting pretty close to 45 years ago when the first book was published, no recipe is using oil. And you talk to anybody that's ever eaten at Neva's table, and they will tell you her food is fabulous. Kathy, you ate there for a whole week. Is that fair enough to say? Did I twist your arm to make you say that? So now listen to Esselstyn. Listen carefully to his closing remarks. Here we go.
Now, you get creative. You will lose weight. You will lose your high blood pressure. You will lose your diabetes. You will feel better. You will lose your risk for stroke. You'll lose your risk for dementia. So there are side effects.
Is that cool or not? List those things for me. List those things for me. He said that you would lose. Just speak up one of them. Weight? Diabetes? Hypertension? Dementia? Is that a big deal? I think that ought to be motivation enough right there. What do you think? All right. I only went 12 minutes over. Neva's going to do a quick little demo if you want to go back to where the refreshments are. Am I correct, dear? We make our own potato chips, which she will show you tomorrow night. We make our own Thursday night. We make our own corn chips. We bake them without using oil. And she'll show you how to do that. And are you going to give them a sample? She'll show you how we make the butter, which is on page 56 in the cookbook. Let me pray for you and with us all. Father in heaven, we thank you for these marvelous bodies you have given us. And we want to always do better in caring for them. Help us, we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.